Hi everybody, welcome to Grid. We are a music and audio post-production house here in Singapore. My name is Edric, I'm the music director here at Grid. Today, we're going to go through a session setup tutorial to get everybody prepared for recording sessions. In today's real-world situation, production sessions usually go pretty fast. As an audio engineer, you are required to swiftly navigate the sessions so as to not hinder the creative workflow of artists and producers. Within the DAW, we're going to cover setting up your tempo, your meter, your markers, your click track, your guide tracks, as well as any audio tracks or plugins. Outside of the DAW, we're going to cover setting up your lyric sheets as well as your chord sheets. Okay, so when it comes to setting up your session for recording, there are a couple of things I usually like to have set in my DAW already, just so that later on everything goes a lot faster. The first thing to take note of is your counter. Most DAWs have this counter. Some of them allow you to have more than one counter at the same time. So usually in Pro Tools, what I do is I always show my sub counter, so I have two different counters going on. When you're in a music production session, it's always useful to have two pieces of information in mind. The first one is your bars and beats, because that's usually how we count music and how we navigate the different sections of the song. And the second one is your minutes and seconds, because sometimes when you come to production sessions, you realize the producers like to take note of, how many minutes into the song the chorus happens, how many minutes into the song the bridge happens. So it's always very useful to have your minutes and seconds counter up as well. The next thing to take note of are all your rulers. All the rulers necessary for a music production session are listed over here in Pro Tools. There's a whole list over here. We don't need all of them. There's just a few of them we need to take note of. Of course, the two most obvious ones would be the same ones as the counter, which is your bars and beats and your minutes and seconds. So bars and beats have already been shown here. We're just going to show your minutes and seconds. The next few we need to bring up are things like your markers, because this will help you to navigate the session a lot more quickly. Your tempo, in case there are any tempo changes in the song, as well as your meter, in case there are any meter changes in the song. So the screen setup as it is right now is usually how I like to start going into a music production session, with all the visual information I have handy to get the session running smoothly. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to set up is the actual session itself for the recording. Usually when you go into recording sessions, either the producer or the artist will send you guide tracks prior to the recording. So it's always useful to import those guide tracks in before the session starts. So it's going to do that now. Okay, in Pro Tools, it's useful to know that the shortcut for importing audio is Shift-Command-I. Okay, so we have the guide tracks imported in. Over here, it's pretty straightforward. You just see there's an acoustic guitar guide track and a lead vocal guide track for the artists to record over later. Guide tracks are always useful because you know the flow of the song, and beforehand, you're able to put in any more information you need for the session to get it going later on. Okay, now the next thing to do is to set up the tempo for the song. It's always good to have the tempo set to what the guide tracks were already done. And information like this is always readily available from either the producer or for the artist. Okay, so for this particular song, the tempo is 138. So we're just going to put that into Pro Tools. Easiest way to do that in Pro Tools is to go to the tempo ruler, click on the diamond icon over there. And this little window will pop up, and then we're going to key in 138. And if you visually just inspect the grid in Pro Tools, if you switch to grid mode, you'll be able to see that if you switch to the right tempo, most of the transients should actually fall onto the grid more or less. Because they're guide tracks, they're not going to be 100% accurate, but you'd be able to visually see that most of them would fall on the transients correctly. Okay, in Pro Tools, it's useful to know that if you need to do any tempo changes, you can do it in the ruler. You can just click on the plus sign, and if there's a tempo change on a later section of the song, you can always key that in. For this particular song, there is no tempo change, so we're not going to do that. Just going to get rid of this. Okay, so now that the tempo is done, the next thing we're going to do is set up the meter for this song. This particular song is in 4/4, so usually when you create your new session, you wouldn't need to change the meter. If the song was in 3/4 or in any other timing like 6/8, then you would go to Pro Tools, you'd go to the meter ruler, You go to the start of the session, hit the plus sign. This window will pop up over here, and you can change this to either 3/4, or if the song was in 6/8, you could change it to 6/8. Okay, but in this case, of course, the song is in 4/4, as about 70% of songs are. So we're going to put this back to 4/4, and that would be the meter. Okay, and the last thing to set up for this section is usually the markers. The markers are extremely useful because during a session, especially in today's real-world recording sessions, it's very rare that you take the entire song in one shot. Usually you're going to different sections of a song at different times. Like you might record all the verses at the same time, verse 1, verse 2, verse 3, and then after that you'd record all the pre-choruses and then all the bridges, depending on how the producer works. So it's always useful to have the marker set up. So we're going to go and do that. In Pro Tools, it's very easy to add a marker. You just hit the Enter key on your numeric keypad. We're going to put in verse 1. And then we're going to look for verse, and we're going to look for the chorus.
But these things we hardly ever know.
And then we can put in chorus 1. We can put in verse 2, chorus 2. And then, of course, you can put in the bridge, the last chorus, and so on and so forth. Okay, so these markers help you navigate the session really quickly. In Pro Tools, it's useful to bring up your memory locations window, which is Command numeric 5. And the fastest way to navigate the markers is to use your period and then the marker number and period again on the numeric keypad. So if I wanted to go to marker number 1, I would hit period 1 period, and it would jump to marker number 1. And if I wanted to go to marker number 3, period 3 period, it would jump to marker number 3. And this helps you navigate a session very, very quickly, especially with producers who like to jump to different sections of the song at the same time. Okay, so one of the most important things to have during a recording session is always the click track, the metronome track, for your musicians and your artists to be able to keep in time with the song that's going on. In Pro Tools, it's pretty straightforward to set up a click track. You just need to go to Track, Create Click Track. And the good thing about that is that in Pro Tools, it already inserts the auxiliary track for you, and if you go to your mix window, it inserts the click plugin for you as well. When you're playing with a click track, let's just play this one over here. Now, throughout many recording sessions, you realize that different musicians and different people like to listen to different sounds when they're listening to the click track. So it's always useful to know that in Pro Tools, and most DAWs, they actually allow you to change the sound that's going on in your click track. Like for example, this one right now is the default Pro Tools click. You can change it to things like a wood block. Let's look for a wood block. Change both to wood block. Okay, so you have different click sounds going on. For drummers especially, they like to listen to the much higher pitched sounds that don't get drowned out during their drumming. Okay, there are certain types of situations where you may realize that your musician or your artist is not singing very well in time, and these usually happen when the tempo of the song is a little bit too slow. This song is 138, so it's actually okay, but for situations like that, sometimes what we do is we'll double the click track. We'll double the time of the click track. So instead of playing on quarter notes, we'll have it play on eighth notes. So in Pro Tools, sometimes in the past, what people used to do is they would double the actual tempo, which is okay, but some situations that might throw all your markers and all other MIDI tracks off in your session. So the best way to do that is always inside the click plugin. So if you go to the mix window, you go to your click plugin. You notice that over here, there's a little button that says follow meter. So we're going to switch that off. And then all these other timing controls have now been enabled inside the plugin. So right now, it's been defaulted to quarter notes.
When the lights go up.
Right, so what we can do is we can change the first accent to happen on a whole note and all the subsequent accents to happen on an eighth note. So then you'd have a double time to the click. And for much slower tempos, this really helps a lot of artists and musicians to keep in time a lot tighter. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do is set up a bunch of track templates that would help your session to run a lot faster. Okay, so for most recording sessions, it's always useful to have a set of tracks already set up just for you to go to and quickly add on plugins or add on settings that will help either the artist to monitor better or to help the overall sound better during the recording so everybody can get into their creative workflow. Okay, so in Pro Tools, what we're going to do, You can set up a bunch of reverb tracks. It's usually useful for when you're like recording vocals. Okay, so if you can see over here in Pro Tools, we have a bunch of tracks set up. This is usually how I have most of my sessions set up. I have four reverb tracks going on. The one on the left is like a standard room reverb, which is useful for when you're monitoring drums or guitars. The one on the right is like a larger plate reverb. Then we have a guitar plate reverb, which is specific for guitars. This is just because I'm a guitarist, so I have one dedicated for guitars. And the last one we have over here is a vocal reverb. Now, this is most useful for when you're recording vocals. A lot of artists like to monitor their own singing with a little bit of reverb because it helps them to sing a lot more naturally. And it helps them to fit a little bit better into the mix as well when you're monitoring. I have a music bus set up. So this is useful when you have a whole bunch of guide tracks or a whole bunch of like recorded tracks already. What I do is I'll send them to this music bus and I can adjust their overall volume just with one fader instead of having to adjust all of them at the same time. I have a vocal bus going on, which is the same thing. If you have a whole bunch of vocal tracks, if you have like a whole bunch of backing vocal recordings, or even multiple layers for your lead vocal recordings, I'll send them all to the vocal track so that I can always balance the difference between the music and the vocals separately with one fader. Okay, so all these I usually set up beforehand before you go into the recording session. So as and when you need to use the reverbs, you can always just route the tracks, directly to the reverb sends. Like over here to the LV verb, and you can send them directly to the reverb without needing to go through the process of setting up a new reverb, setting up, a new aux track inside Pro Tools. Now, all these reverb settings, are not what you're going to commit to the mix, because later on you can always go in and you can adjust each individual reverb, but they're just here as a go-to startup just to get the session running a lot more smoother. Okay, so setting up the chord and lyric sheet is pretty straightforward. As you can see, we have a template set up already, and we're just going to go through the individual components on the template. At the top, we have the song title, as well as the artist name. The next most important section are the 4 columns we have over here. The first column signifies the key of the song. So over here, you will list down basically any key changes that occur throughout the song, which will help you to navigate the session a lot faster. The second section is the part of the song that is in, whether it's verse 1, verse 2, chorus, or bridge, or pre-chorus. Same thing, this helps you navigate the session a lot faster as well. Okay, so the most useful column would be this one over here, which are the numbered lines. This helps you to signify to the artist which line to redo or which section to redo a lot faster just by calling out the numbers themselves. And this is especially useful if you are working with lyrics of a language you are not familiar with. And the last column we have, of course, is the lyrics and the chords, which is for you to list down all the lyrics and the chords of the song. Thank you, everybody. That's the end of today's lesson. I hope you learned something. If you would like to contact us, you can reach us at our website, gryd.studio. Thank you.